Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. My name is Nihal Khan. I am a... Is that me or did someone do that? Oh, okay. Well, while somebody's fixing that, inshallah. My name is Nihal Khan. I am a PhD student at UCLA. Before that, I was actually an Imam. So I'm here at the invitation of Imam Asif Hirani, who I believe is your resident scholar. Funny story is that me and Imam Asif happened to be in New Jersey at the same time. Then afterwards, he became the Imam of the Islamic Center of Connecticut at Medina Masjid, after which I became the Imam there. And then afterwards, he came here. I spent some time traveling. And now I am doing a PhD in history. I love speaking about history, so I want to talk to you all about history today, inshallah. So the topic that we have at hand is called European Colonization and the Modern Muslim World. And this topic is something that's very important to me because we're going to be just talking about four events, that's all. And in these four events, we will see a culmination of how we got to where we are today. So the way this program is going to work is that number one, I'm going to do a presentation and I'll be walking around. So this is an active presentation. And we're going to be going over facts. This is not an all-encompassing presentation, meaning what? That if I do not mention something about a certain place or a certain country, it does not mean I have something against that. It's just that we have barely an hour. I have now done this program 13 times or 14 times. It's supposed to be an hour-and-a-half program, but for some reason, I'm not able to do it in an hour-and-a-half, and even today, we're gonna barely have an hour. So I'm gonna go through a couple of events and talk about this idea of European colonization in the modern Muslim world. Now, for those of you that have ever been to my home in California, which I don't think anyone has, I have maps all over my home. So unlike normal people who hang up like artwork, if you go to my dining room, I have this map up, right? Ask my wife how much she loves this map. And she has to explain to guests why her husband, who loves history and maps, has maps all over the place. But this is a map of the world, to some extent, not the entire world, but the world as we knew it up until 1492. And this map is written in a language known as Osmanlıca, which is the Ottoman language. It was spoken in the Ottoman Empire up until 1924, and this is how it used to be written. Now, during this time period, if you actually look at this, you would read this and tell yourself, oh, I don't know, I didn't realize that Turkish used to be written like this. And you would think to yourself that this is Urdu or that this is Arabic. But actually, if you were to take a look at this, this entire screen, sorry, I'm just seeing, I don't know why my clicker is not working. But anyways, if you were to look at this map, and you would see that all the way starting from the top of Spain, going down into Africa, into not just North Africa, but actually this part of Africa down into what is, what do you call it, Gambia, Mali, Timbuktu, that whole area, down into Somalia, up all the way into what is considered now modern-day Saudi Arabia, into Anatolia, Turkey, into what is over there, it says Ajamistan, but actually it's in reference to Iran and the various istans that were there. Go a little bit more north where there's modern-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and other places. And then going into Afghanistan, what is modern-day Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, going into what is modern-day Burma, connecting all the way into the islands, which is now today known as Indonesia and Malaysia. Language used to be written like this. Language used to be written like this. So in the 20th century, there were many movements that came about, talking about making a difference in the language. So some countries like Turkey made that jump. Some countries didn't but wanted to, like in Iran. And there were even conversations in the Arab world about writing Arabic in Latin letters, but it never came to be. But this is important to keep in mind because you all need to be very aware of, why do you speak the language that you speak? Right? Why do you speak the language that you speak? Let me ask you, where are we right now? What state? 4 people know, mashallah. What state are you in? You're in Texas. Was Texas always a part of the United States? No. Texas was a part of the Mexican Empire. And before it was part of the Mexican Empire, it was part of the Spanish Empire. So the language that was spoken in Texas and is still spoken is and was Spanish, but it was an official language. So keeping that in mind, why do we speak English? Well, we speak English because Mexico and America went to war, and America, which happened to be a British colony, ended up doing what? They ended up winning. So when they won, the language that was enforced upon people was English. That's how that happened. Now let me ask you, how many of you are from Morocco or Tunisia or Algeria? Okay, comment allez-vous? Right, why, what did I just say? I said something in French. Why would I say something in French? Well, if you know the history of Algeria, Algeria was colonized by the French, and it stayed colonized by the French until the 50s and the 60s, where until the Algerian independence broke out and they gave them a kick. Why am I mentioning that? Because you'll find a lot of Muslims from North Africa, they made their way where? To France and other parts of the Francophone world, which we'll talk about later today. So hence, why do you speak English? Because many of you are either from the Arab world or you're from South Asia, in which the British heavily colonized those lands. When you hear about somebody South Asian being from Kenya or Zimbabwe or South Africa or from Guyana or from Trinidad and Tobago, or they're from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or they're living in England, it's not that big of a deal because language, which was English, was the main means of communication in the British Empire. Hence, the British threw a lot of South Asians around wherever they wanted. This is just an important point to keep in mind as we traverse. Language has so much history within it. Language has so much history within it. And we're going to see how those commonalities within language make a big difference today. So I had a chance to travel to roughly 21 countries. So I was born and raised in a country that many of you may have heard of. It's called New Jersey. Right? That's where I'm from. Usually people laugh at that. Yeah, Allah, subhanallah. Man, awesome. Do something, man. What's going on? He's also from New Jersey. How many of you from New Jersey? All right. Me and him, mashallah. Allahu Akbar. May Allah bless you. Your own Imam. Imam Asif is from New Jersey. Right? Allahu Akbar. You need to appreciate that place. Anyway, I actually used to live in Dallas. I lived in Dallas from 2010 to 2011, many years ago. And at that time, there were 5 halal restaurants. And I think there was, for every halal restaurant, there was 1 masjid. Something like that. But mashallah, the community's really grown. Anyhow, so I had a chance to travel. I went to Egypt, Uzbekistan, Turkey. There's just a few of the places that I had a chance to go to. I lived in Istanbul from 2021 to 2024. Any Turks here? Anyone Turkish? Oh man, you guys gotta do some outreach. Right? You need people of the former Ottoman Empire living in your community. I've had a chance to go to Palestine several times. I've been to northern Syria. Last year I had a chance to go to Iran, and I actually visited when Iran fired missiles at Israel in April of 2024. Really interesting time. I also had a chance to visit the various European countries that are there because of the fact that I was interested in a certain topic, which I'm talking about today, European colonization and the modern Muslim world. So I had a chance to do that as well. I also went to Spain, which is one of the most beautiful places you'll go to. Today in 2025, we are talking about the topic of a genocide constantly. Do you know where else there was a genocide happening in the 90s? Was in Bosnia. The only difference is that there was more conversation about it because it was in America's interests to do what? To actually help the Bosnian people. But at the end of the day, UN soldiers were deployed. They literally didn't do anything, and 8,500 to 9,500 Bosnian Muslims, Bosniak Muslims were killed for the sake of them being Muslim. So even with a very flimsy attachment to Islam, because if you go to Bosnia, people are not extensively religious when it comes to their personal practice, but they still maintain a Muslim identity. And I also had a chance to go to Morocco. I also went to South Asia. So my family is originally from Bihar, India. So my father grew up in Kolkata. My wife is Pakistani, so I had a chance earlier this year to go to Pakistan, or last year rather. But I spent 3 years in the city of Lucknow. Any Lucknowis here? Just curious. No one here from Lucknow? Is anyone here from anywhere? Right? So I had a chance to go to Lucknow. Any Hyderabadis here? Oh my God. Everywhere else I go, like half the room is Hyderabadi. But anyhow, the Taj Mahal, this was at Badshahi Masjid in Lahore, Jaipur, and Calcutta. I had a chance to really get around the world. Now, I want to get into today's topic, colonization. When we talk about colonization, more often than not, it's just a buzzword. So you hear somebody mention it in the khutbah. You hear someone talk about it in the context of, what do you call it, something being really bad. Or if you went to any public schools, say in the United States, they have a much more positive idea of colonization. So from a raise of hands, just curious, just from a raise of hands, can someone give me a one-word description of what colonization is? One word, yes. Stealing? Okay, give me more. Let's say you're a white kid in a public school. What are you being taught about colonization? One word. Hold on, there's somebody asking. Okay, destroying, okay. Give me something positive that you may hear, even if it's not true. Yes. Expansion, okay. Anything else? Raise your hand. I'm sorry? Democracy, right? Yes. Economics, good. Now, when you become more in tune with what colonization was, you realize that it was exploitation. You realize there was destruction. But it's important that when you as a Muslim, when you as someone that's trying to become informed of his or her history, you can't just talk with buzzwords, right? You can't just speak with buzzwords. You know, more often than not, sometimes you'll hear an Imam just use buzzwords on the mimbar because they have 20 minutes, 30 minutes to convey an idea, but you have to expand ideas. So when we talk about colonization, what is it that we want to talk about? Well, there's a very, very specific word that there's a couple of things that we need to talk about. Number one, colonization was about economic motives. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. It was about money. It was about expansion. Number two, which is global rivalry. Here's some food for thought. For those of you that are from South Asia, we know that the Portuguese were there, the Dutch were there, the French were there, the British were there. But you know, if you're following what recently has been happening in Syria, recently as in 2024, you see that for the last 11, 12, 13 years, that people are fighting, right? They were fighting there. Who was fighting? It was really a proxy war between America and Russia. And they were using someone else's land to fight a war there. So it's not something new. When you go to South Asia in the 1700s, one of the European empires that had much of the land of that area, they actually were who? The Dutch. The Dutch, they own many of the port cities. And then when you go to the United States, one very important city was owned by the Dutch. It was known as New Amsterdam. So the Anglo-Dutch wars started happening. There were a handful of them. And at the end of it, the British won. So when the British won, they took all the Dutch ports and it became British property. In South Asia, and I'm using South Asia on purpose because India, Pakistan, Bangladesh are, you know, those terms are barely 100 years old. But South Asia, generally speaking, or Hindustan, was what every European empire was coveting. They really wanted it. So after the British took out the Dutch, you see they're having squabbles with the French, and the French couldn't actually make any headway into South Asia. So instead, what did they do? They went to this place that was kind of emerging in the West, in which the French were kicked out by the colonists in this certain country. And eventually, when they were kicked out, these colonists were helped by the British to kick out the French. And then these colonists were told by the British that we want you to pay us back for the services we provided. These colonists said no. So eventually, they allied with the French to kick out the British. This country is known as the United States of America. So believe it or not, because the French weren't able to defeat the British in India or in South Asia, they ended up coming to the United States. Why does all this matter? Because so much of these conversations revolve around global European rivalry and their inability to basically do what? Their inability to want to really fight their own battles on their own turf. Number 3, spreading Christianity. Particularly going to these lands and saying, you heathens, you don't have true religion. We need to be here to civilize you, to educate you, to have your soul saved by Christ's name. That's what it was. That's what it was. And then number 4, to exploit the weakness of the Muslim world. Because I want you all to keep something in mind. The Muslim world at this time consisted of major gunpowder empires. The Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. The Safavids had started crumbling internally very early on. The Ottomans were relatively strong, and the Mughals as well by 1857, if you know about the British mutiny and everything, the Mughal Empire had come to an end and had been weakened from the 1700s onwards, rather. Even though they were ended in 1857, if you read the history, the 1700s was just plagued with emperor after an emperor killing the other person, proxy wars, and all that other fun stuff. So that's what colonization is. It's important to know what you're talking about. So today we are going to talk about the first aspect of the program, which is the fall of Constantinople and the rise of Istanbul. By a raise of hands, how many of you have been to Turkey? Okay, so many of you understand what I'm going to talk about. Now, something very, very important to keep in mind, right? Something very, very important to keep in mind is Turkey, or rather the Ottomans, were one of the only Muslim lands to actually not be colonized, okay? To not be colonized, wherein after World War I, the British, the Italians, the French, and the Greeks had all entered into the last remaining part of the Ottoman Empire, and they had colonized it for 4 years. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman army fought them off and removed them. But it's really important to understand why Istanbul is an extremely important city today. Now, this picture on the left is an artist's rendering of Fatih Sultan Mehmet entering into Constantinople on May 29th, 1453, and in essence, taking it over. Now, this other picture on the right is a picture of his grave, and as you can see, there's a turban on top of his grave. In Ottoman history, people that had big turbans based on the size of the turban on the grave showcased their importance. Now, the picture on the left, when I first saw this picture, I put it on Instagram and I said that this is a live picture of Muslims entering New York City and JFK in the 80s. This is how we kind of arrived. We made our desi restaurants. We made the Arab businesses. We started the taxi drivers, right? We had all these medallions, right? So it was a whole ton of Muslims entering from what is known as the Adirne-Kapı Gate. Now, if you were to move into this picture has a certain piece of artwork over here on top. And it's a hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, wherein he said, "La tuftahanna al-Qistantiniya," that indeed Constantinople will be conquered, it will be taken. "Wala ni'mal amiru amiruha," and how amazing will its leader be. "Wala ni'mal jayshu dhalikal jaysh," and how amazing will its army be. So this is a hadith foretold by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So it's an important point to keep in mind as we traverse basically this this presentation. Now, in just a second, I just wanted to try. I think it's my, that's why it's not working. My Bluetooth's off. Bismillah, let's see if this works now. Let's see. Alhamdulillah. Simple solutions for not so complicated problems. So, coming to this hadith, this is the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what you see in the background here is an artist's rendering of Constantinople while it was still under Catholic control. Now, I'm going to tell you all about why Constantinople was very important in just a moment. This is the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you talk about the Ottoman Empire in the year 1450, this is how it looked. How many of you have watched those Turkish series with Ertugrul? How many of you have seen Ertugrul or Osman? All right, here we go. So the Ottoman Empire began in a small little city somewhere over here known as Sout. And these were people that were nomads. They were under Seljuk control or Seljuk rule to some time. Eventually the Seljuks were getting weaker in certain areas, so the Ottomans started to establish themselves. They became established in the year 1299, and they kind of stayed in the Anatolia area. Anatolia is this part of what is modern-day Turkey. But believe it or not, it's really interesting. You see this really, really small, you're gonna have to zoom into it, this small gray part here? You see how that's not green yet? Because when the Ottomans started to expand, they went this way into Anatolia. They made their way all the way into the Asian part, but they could not break into Constantinople. So much so that the Umayyads, the Abbasids, they all tried to enter Constantinople, but were not successful. So eventually the Ottomans, what did they do? They were maritime warriors. They were warriors on boats. So they get into their boat. How many of you seen the Barbaros series? Right? So you see how even in water, these Muslims were extremely astute. Any of you know about the Pirates of Caribbean? It's like the old movie series, right? In the Pirates of the Caribbean, the pirate that Johnny Depp plays, what's his name? Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow, actually if you read the history, converted to Islam and worked for the Ottomans. Really interesting story. So what did the Ottomans do? They went from sea, they landed in Greece, and they basically ruled over all of this part of Eastern Europe. And that was actually the jewel of the Ottoman Empire. It was the longest controlled part of the Ottoman Empire. So eventually, this is what it looked like in 1450. I want you to remember a year. What year did we say Constantinople came under Muslim rule? What year? 1453. I want you all to keep that year in mind. So 1450, this is what the Ottoman Empire looks like. 1453, they take Constantinople. 100 years later, this is what the empire looked like. Constantinople was so important because of the fact that it was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. What is the Byzantine Empire? Why does it matter? We'll talk about it in a moment. But the Ottoman Empire greatly expanded, greatly expanded. So you know how sometimes when people talk about different countries, we always talk about like, I'm from this country, I'm from that country, and my culture is this. And then their kids try to get married and like, no, 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 no. We don't marry people from Plano. We are from Richardson. Alhamdulillah. Right? We are from Richardson. So we create these funny, as ridiculous as that sounds, a lot of the borders that we've created, we would basically do what? We would go in between borders. Yamshu fil ard. We would go through the earth without anyone stopping us. Parts of the Sharia were established to say that someone that is a subject of a certain empire should be able to traverse it in safety and without having them stopped and having them looted and whatnot. So when you think about countries, say for example, if I were to say Algeria, which many of you are familiar with, if I were to say Tunisia, if I were to say Libya, right? Libya was controlled for some time by the Italians. You know the story of Umar Mukhtar. Egypt, which eventually was controlled by the French and by the British. If you talk about the modern Arabian Peninsula, what is known as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, Palestine, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Yemen. If you talk about the entire Balkans, anyone here from the Balkans? Anyone here? Albanian, Bosnian? We have to do outreach, brothers and sisters. Got to do that outreach. Right? Bosnia Herzegovina, you talk about Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Greece. When you talk about Anatolia as well, Anatolia is the name of the that part of Turkey, but also up here, anyone know what this little island here is called? No, that's not Cyprus. This is Cyprus. What's this? Anyone know? Huh? Crimea. Crimea, where many Tatars come from, and which is technically it's disputed land between Ukraine and Russia. All of these areas were in one way, either directly or indirectly, controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So now you see Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, Damascus, Baghdad, Baku is in Azerbaijan, all the way up to what is considered modern-day Russia and Ukraine, into Budapest, Belgrade, Sofia, Athens in Greece, going all the way into Algeria, Tunis, Tripoli, Alexandria, Cairo, and parts of Somalia were in some way, one or another, controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Hence, many times, particularly if you come from Arab origin, or you come from South Asian origin, we don't learn about the Ottomans, but it's really important to learn about them because they were a force to not be reckoned with. So much so, there's a guy by the name of Christopher Columbus, which we'll talk about in a moment. One of the reasons, we'll talk about Muslim Spain, they went westward is because it was difficult to go eastward because the Ottomans were there. So eventually, I want you all to take this into thinking about this. This is a verse from the Quran. Alif Lam Mim Ghulibatir Rum, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim, Rum, basically, Rome has been conquered. It's not about Rome, it's about the Byzantines have been conquered. Today, when we talk about superpowers, the superpowers are who? America, Russia, China. And they're constantly battling for influence and land and resources. So the map on the right here showcases what? The people on the left, the orange, are the Byzantines. The people on the right in purple are the Sasanians, the Persians. They were the main powers fighting for influence. The capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, for those of you that know your history, the Roman Empire, the entirety of Europe, and basically parts of North Africa were all under one empire. The empire was huge. Eventually, it became fractured, and Eastern Roman Christianity, Eastern Orthodox, whatever you want to call it, the capital of it was Constantinople. So when this verse was revealed, Alif Lam Mim Ghulibatir Rum, the place that Allah is speaking about is saying that the Byzantines have become successful against fighting the Persians at that time period. So in the time of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Rome that is being mentioned is that of Constantinople. And in Constantinople, their White House was what? The Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia, by about 20 years, is older than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very amazing. Right here, this is the structure, the Hagia Sophia. And the Hagia Sophia is also very, very interesting. Because of the fact, how many of you have been to the Hagia Sophia? It's one of the most magnificent places you'll visit. If you haven't gone, your next trip should be to Turkey. It's very important if you're interested in Islamic history. The one thing that you see, particularly many of you living in Texas, you have a whole ton of people that are like, the Sharia law is coming to Texas, what are we going to do? Right? You've heard people say that. Everything that happened with Epic City and who is it, Greg Abbott and everyone, and Ted Cruz, even though Ted Cruz himself is Cuban, right? But all these false narratives about how Muslims are and how Islamic law is and how Muslims are savages and all that. This right here is one of the oldest structures of Christianity. It was conquered by Fatih Sultan Mehmed in 1453. Now, generally speaking, this structure, there's a false narrative that has been put forward by people. Today, this is a masjid. Let me ask you all, when did this become declared a masjid? In the year 2020. In the year 1923 or 1924, at the behest of the British and the Americans, Mustafa Kemal, he turned this structure into a museum. Before it was a museum, it was what? It was a masjid. It was a masjid from the year 1453 until 1924. Now, before 1453, what was it? It was the biggest basilica, the biggest church in the world. By a raise of hands, how many of you have been to Rome? How many of you have been to Italy, Rome? How many of you have been to Vatican City? If you go to Vatican City and you go to St. Peter's Basilica, which is now the largest basilica, Christian basilica, Catholic basilica in the world, it's actually very similar to the Hagia Sophia because before that time period, the Hagia Sophia was the most revered Christian basilica in the world. Now here is the irony. The irony is that the Hagia Sophia was extremely, extremely dilapidated when Fatih Sultan Mehmed took it over. And when he took it over, it needed repairs, so he hired some local Christians who understood the structure and did what? They repaired it up. Because at that time, other Christian groups were coming and they were raiding Constantinople constantly. If you read about the Latin Empire, they wanted to come and take Constantinople. They came, they killed, they maimed, and then they just leave. So it was in such a dilapidated condition that they actually built it up. And if you look here closely, right, you see this. This is a mihrab. You see here the mimbar. And then if you look up here, this is an icon made by the Catholics, God knows how long ago, which is supposed to be Mother Mary. Now, for Muslims, they didn't sit there and destroy it. If you go there now, it's just covered. There's other icons there as well. They covered them because technically speaking, it's considered makruh to pray in front of an image. You're not supposed to pray in front of an image. So when people say anywhere Muslims go, they just destroy things, this right here is a testament to anything other than that. And this is what it looks like from the outside. It's a very, very beautiful structure. So 1453, Ottomans start coming up. Now, as one empire rises, another one falls. Let's go from Turkey to Spain. Because guess what? The Spanish Empire, man, for those of us that live in the United States, they don't talk about how the Spanish Empire was so powerful when they came to Florida, when they had all of this. And guess what? From now on, when you see these maps, and I have it highlighted in yellow, the yellow highlight showcases a very Muslim majority area. So, in essence, Spain used to look like this. The Al-Andalus, which we know it as, in this image which you see, this is the peak of Muslim Spain. Muslim Spain, what ended up happening is that the Abbasid revolution happens and they kill off everyone in the Umayyad Empire. One man by the name of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil flees through North Africa, through the deserts, makes friends, and then eventually with a guy named Tariq ibn Ziyad, they sail towards Spain, to the Iberian Peninsula. They land at a place that is now known as Gibraltar. But Gibraltar is actually in Arabic known as Jabal al-Tariq. But it became Angloized as Gibraltar. They come in and they settle themselves into Al-Andalus and they begin moving upwards. So much so that what is modern day Spain, modern day Portugal, and southern Spain all used to be under Al-Andalus. But like good old Muslims end up doing, they started having trouble with their neighbors, their fellow Muslim neighbors. So they started knocking on the doors of all the Catholic monarchs that lived over at that time period from the different areas there. And they say, hey, Catholic buddy, old pal, I don't like my Muslim neighbor. Can you help me kick him out and take his riches? And then maybe you can give some to me and I'll give some to you. So their neighbors who have these powerful armies said, yeah, bro, sure, I'll help you out. Why not, buddy, old pal? So that continued on, where by the time the 1000s and the 1100s came around, we see the Caliphate of Qurtuba come about. The Caliphate of Qurtuba consists of all these small little kingdoms known as ta'ifas. And a ta'ifa is now a disjointed Muslim kingdom, where this back and forth continued. And by the way, have any of you heard of Tafsir al-Qurtubi? Tafsir al-Qurtubi? Have you heard of people like Ibn Hazm? Have you heard of Ibn Arabi? Have you heard of all these different people? These were the giants of Muslim Spain, where scholarship today still exists from that era. But eventually this continued on until by the 1400s, this is all that was left. This is the Emirate of Granada. How many of you have been to Spain? Raise of hands. Spain is also a very important place to go to, particularly when you go to Granada. It's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see. Anyways, there's this guy, Christopher Columbus. Right? Can someone tell me where in America did Christopher Columbus land? Where did California? Anyone else? Colombia? No, I said where in the United States. He never landed in the United States. Christopher Columbus never stepped foot in these contiguous United States, yet he is given an extremely important role by Isabella and Ferdinand, who were directly responsible for the fall of Muslim Spain. Why? What ended up happening? Well, let's talk about him in just a moment, but I want to go to this picture. This is a picture, it's an artist's rendering of Granada, with Muhammad the 12th, this guy right over here. Muhammad the 12th basically ceding the keys of Granada to Isabella, Ferdinand, and this fellow right here. This is a artist's rendition of historical records talking about Christopher Columbus's presence at the fall of Muslim Spain. It is historically proven he was there. Now, this gentleman, history tells us, he made a pact with Isabella and Ferdinand and said, Isabella and Ferdinand, I want to control Granada, but my dad, I don't like my dad. Like, so, you know, sometimes you have issues with your dad. There's different ways to resolve it. He just thought the way to resolve this issue with his dad was to team up with the Catholic monarchs and get his father jailed. So they went, they jailed him, and then afterwards they told Muhammad the 12th that, Muhammad, Mr. 12, we got you the keys for the city, but we want to make a small amendment to our agreement. give us the keys to the city, convert to Catholicism, or be killed or go leave the Iberian Peninsula. He left with 1,200 of his servants, went down to what is modern-day Morocco, and he died with not a single penny to his name. But coming back to Christopher Columbus, surprisingly, he sailed the Atlantic 4 times. And the years are on the screen. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about each one of those times. But what's really interesting is that Christopher Columbus sailed the Atlantic 4 times as an alive man and 4 times as a dead man. Actually, he spent more time traveling as a dead man than he did as an alive man. Why is that? Well, first and foremost, this is a picture of Christopher Columbus's grave in Sevilla. And when Christopher Columbus died, he was buried in Valladolid. Valladolid, by the way, is the Spanishized version of Walad al-Walid. Valladolid is actually Walad al-Walid. So he was buried there in 1506, and he stayed buried there until 1509. 1509, his son Diego is like, hey man, you know, one thing that we're going to do is we're going to move dad to Sevilla, right? We're going to move dad to Sevilla. So they moved him to Sevilla and buried him there for 28 years. But then guess what happens? Eventually, they were talking about moving him, and they moved him a second time, but this time to Santo Domingo Española, which is where? Modern-day Dominican Republic. And when they moved him to Española, they moved him to Santo Domingo. You know why? Because by this time, the Spanish Empire's territories were increasing, and they considered it very holy to bury people in some of their territories in the Americas. So they moved him to Santo Domingo. So he stayed buried there for 258 years. You're like, okay, finally, bye. You know, we're going to let him rest. But guess what? Eventually, the French take over Española. And they say now, let's move him one more time. So they take him from Española, which is Santo Domingo, and they move him all the way over here to Havana, Cuba, where he stays buried for 103 years. But then guess what? You know, the Spanish Empire, they have this large empire, but guess what? This thing starts happening called independence, right? And look at the year. Look at the year. 1795, he's buried in Havana, Cuba. 1776, America forms. All these different European countries, they start doing what? They start basically declaring independence from their colonial empires. And then he stays buried there for 103 years. You're like, all right, fine, he's done. That's it. Nope. Guess what happens? The Spanish-American War happens of 1898. America wins. Cuba becomes an American territory. And the Spanish are like, Christopher Columbus represents something so great for us. What we want to do is take the body with us. We're going to take the body with us. So they sail him from Havana, Cuba, back to where? Back to where you came from, right? Go back to where you came from. So they sent him back to where he came from, Sevilla. So they buried him in Sevilla. So it's important to understand this. Why? Because kids are constantly taught about Christopher Columbus. And I was asked this question by someone. They were like, oh, why do Americans love Christopher Columbus? He goes, what does he represent? He represents European powers going to non-European countries and doing what? Colonizing them, taking their resources. So even though Christopher Columbus, he landed in what is considered modern-day Dominican Republic, he never came here. He never came here. Right? He never came to the contiguous United States, yet he is revered as a figure. Let that speak for itself. So this ends up happening. Coming back to Spain, I took this picture in Granada. It's one of the most beautiful places you'll go to. This is the Alhambra Palace. It literally is Alhambra, coming from Al-Hamra, from red in Arabic. You go there, it's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see. And one thing you'll see all over there is this calligraphy, وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Very funny story. But in Atlantic City, New Jersey, there is a casino where they wanted to build a Spanish architecture building, and the front of the casino basically has this beautiful calligraphy which says وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Because of the fact that the casino owners thought that this is just Spanish architecture. They didn't know what it means. So much so that my hotel in Granada, when I was there, it says وَلَا غَالِبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ everywhere. It's just, it's like a generic Granada Royal Hotel or something. But, so really interesting story, by the way. This is how beautiful this place was. This was under Muslim rule for so many years. Eventually, Miss Isabella dies, and they bury her here. This is where she was first buried. But over here, what does it say? It says, "Wala ghaliba illallah" everywhere. So even after she took the Iberian Peninsula, she basically abolished the Granada Caliphate. She was buried in a place in which they said, "Wala ghaliba illallah" everywhere. And again, I don't know what this is, but actually I know what it is, but there's a Catholic tradition in which their saints get moved around to what they deem to be more holy or more revered places. Eventually, she's exhumed from here, and she's buried down here with her husband. No pictures were allowed down there, but I couldn't help myself. So I took that picture. Coming back, eventually, for those of you that know about Spain's history, it was initially in 1492. The Muslims actually were not taken out. So one thing you'll see is over here. This masjid was built with money given by Muammar Gaddafi. The money was given when he was still alive. But the masjid could not actually build the masjid because of like zoning issues, this and that. Now, really funny, interesting story. Does anyone know who Spain supported in World War I and World War II? Did they support the Allies or the Axis? Right? In World War I or World War II? Either. They didn't support neither. You know why? Because they were going through a civil war. For those of you who know the history of Spain, Spain stayed under a dictator named Franco up until the 50s. When that dictatorship ended, they became very interested in their history. So they finally built this masjid right across from there, and they built this beautiful minaret. And I think it's really important for you all to hear sounds, because when you hear the adhan, sometimes in the United States, it's actually very scary. Does anyone know what the adhan sounds like without a microphone? Because many of us, for the last maybe 100 years or so, have only heard the adhan in the microphone. Now, if you hear the adhan in the microphone, it's actually a new thing that when somebody's giving the adhan, it sounds very melodic. You're like, Allahu Akbar, Allah, whatever. Like, you hear the Imam doing that. Historically, that wasn't a thing. When you heard the adhan, how many of you have been to Morocco? Morocco. When they give the adhan, does it sound like that in Morocco? How does it sound like? It sounds like an emergency alert system, because they have actually preserved this tradition of how the adhan used to be given. There used to be small masjids everywhere. And very frankly speaking, you know, in certain countries, people are like, let's just ban the adhan on the microphone, and they conflate that with just banning the adhan. Think about this. Historically, we used to have more masjids, maybe every quarter mile. One person would get up, he would give the adhan, everyone would hear it, it wouldn't be dulling upon your ears, and people that didn't need to hear it, they didn't have to do that. So now we have the system where we're projecting the adhan everywhere. But listen to this. In 2023 or 2022, in Granada, Spain, they said we're going to give the adhan but without a microphone, and watch how the muadhin runs in between. Historically, this is exactly how I give it. The muadhin will go to one part and say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And you go over here, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, because you can't sit there and be melodious. You're going to wreck your voice. But listen to how it was being given here. See how he's moving around? It's just important to hear sounds, because we have forgotten much of how the Muslim world looked like before technology. Everyone is like going buck wild about AI, right? Oh my God, AI is here. No one's going to learn how to do this. No one's going to learn how to do that. AI is just there to put the nail in the coffin. We've been becoming basically completely desensitized to just living in the real world by every form of technological advancement that has come. But I have a podcast, it's called Maktab Academy. If you actually scan that QR code and you sign up, you can see everything that our website has media-wise. I did a podcast with Abu Ayub Marulanda. He's originally from Colombia, grew up in New York and in Canada, and we had a really good conversation about how Muslim Spain affected us. Now, the next thing that this ties into is how empires connect to Muslim West Africa. Adhan is what time? 9:07 or 8? Is it already time or is it not time yet? It's in 2 minutes? Okay. So Muslim West Africa and what happened there is a very important conversation to have. But in essence, if you are South Asian or Arab, it's probably very common that you don't know what sounds sound like in Muslim West Africa. Muslim West Africa is an amazing society in which the best Quran reciters in the world come from, ulama come from. If you read about the history of Senegal, Gambia, of Mali, of all the different countries in that area, how they resisted the French and they fought back against them enslaving their Muslim brothers and sisters. And then when you learn about how a significant percentage of the enslaved people taken from West Africa and sent into the Americas were actually Muslim, it changes the way you look at things. But before Adhan, I just want to play one thing for you all. And we'll do the history afterwards. But I want you to hear how Quran is recited in West African madaris, because these are madaris that you may be thinking to yourself, oh, in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, we have these hufad factories, and in the Khalij, they sound like this. But I want you to hear how Quran sounds in a place and how this connects actually to American Muslim history after you hear this recitation. And we can continue it on afterwards, but I think it's important to hear sounds. It's important to hear sounds because visuals are not enough. Talking about it is not enough, but it's important to hear how these societies function. Inshallah, after the adhan, we have about 20 minutes or so. I'll get into talking about Muslim West Africa and hopefully finish up the presentation. And then for those of you that will inshallah stick around after Isha, Isha is at 9:30, so we will have Q&A after that. And I think they'll give a mic to the sisters to also have Q&A, inshallah. So why don't we go ahead and give the adhan, and then inshallah, we'll continue the rest of the program. Any muadhins? Is someone afraid to now give it because I just spoke about giving the adhan? Oh, okay.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Okay, inshallah. So, inshallah, before we end off, let's talk about Muslim West Africa. So I kind of gave you all an introduction of it. Now, moving in, this is actually a picture of Mali in Timbuktu, right? Or rather, Timbuktu in Mali. And from this region, people don't know about the Muslims that were living there, literally of royalty, who were ulama, some of whom were quite literally shipped off into slavery and sold into slavery by factors out of their control. But Muslim West Africa was so educated in the 1700s and in the 1800s that basically, to give you an idea first and foremost of how much of the world was colonized by the British. So you know how I was talking about Muslim world being colonized by the Spanish? It was a lot less. Remember, the yellow parts are Muslim areas. So this was the crown jewel, you could say, of the French, right? They spent some time out here. If you know about Guyana, French Guyana, they had some ports here and there, but this is really what they capitalized on. And if you look at where that influence going from Tunisia into what is modern day Morocco, into everything down here, into West Africa, into coming its way over here, you see how much influence they had. Madagascar, Mauritius, all these different islands. And as I mentioned about India, the reason that this is all here is because they were eventually kicked out of India. They didn't last. And also, this whole area, right? For those of you that know about Vietnam, Vietnam was colonized by the French. But this gentleman here, Baron Roger, who was a French administrator in West Africa, said that more people were educated in Arabic in the 17 and 1800s in West Africa than the entirety of France. So to give you an idea of how thriving of a society was there, it's very important to understand. Now this gentleman here is Al-Hajj Umar Futi Tal, rahmatullahi alayh, who was someone that, for those of you listening from the government in Texas, he declared jihad. Okay? Who did he declare jihad against? His jihad was very interesting. He declared jihad against other African empires who had enslaved people of their neighboring African empires and who were working with the French to sell their fellow brothers and sisters into slavery. So this is the region of what you know Senegal to be today, but Gambia is there. These are all modern constructions. They have different languages that are spoken in the region, Wolof, Fulani, for those of you that know. But there's an article that I'm putting on the screen here called Slavery in Islamic West Africa, in which this highlighted portion, I think it's very important to read, wherein one of the reasons Umar Futi Tal, rahmatullahi alayh, made jihad against others in that region and said that it is an obligation on Muslims to make jihad there because they were selling slaves south towards the Atlantic slave trade, and they would justify enslavement. Why? Because they wanted to encourage people of non-Muslims to Islam, which could not happen if people were sold outside of Darul Islam. That's the other thing, because people were being cut off of the opportunity to become Muslim. Guess what? If somebody becomes Muslim in Islam, in the past, and they happen to be enslaved, what happened to them? They had the chance to be emancipated. They had the chance to be freed. So now Umar Futi Tal recognizes if they're being sold into French hands and being shipped off, and not just the French, by the way, the Spanish as well, the Portuguese as well, the British as well, they were all involved in the slave trade. He said that they're being cut off from the Islamic world, so what do? Declare jihad. And eventually moving on, I wanted to mention that this individual, his name is Sheikh Ibrahim Niyas, rahmatullahi alayh, also known in West Africa as Bai. And Bai had a daughter named Maryam Niyas. Maryam Niyas, rahmatullahi alayh, started a bunch of Quran schools in which her father sought to inculcate two ideas. The idea of being able to speak French, but also being able to learn Quran. Why is that important? You know how sometimes in the United States, people, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, people were a little bit weird about maybe learning, I don't know, regular school studies as well as Quranic studies. So Sheikh Ibrahim Niyas recognized that the French were trying to use the French language to influence the Muslims to be French. So what did he do? He started Quran schools in which they also taught French. So now you can speak French, have some amount of Francophone culture, which is just a part of who you are. Like today, it's a really not smart idea. If we're like, oh, we are Muslims, brother. When the British colonized us, therefore we will not speak English. Like, okay, what do you want me to speak? What do you want me to speak then? And is that fair to everyone that doesn't know English? No, it doesn't work like that. Language has no religion. She had a son named Osman Khan. Dr. Osman, I spent a year of my master's at Harvard Divinity School, and Dr. Osman is one of the world experts of Islam in West Africa. And he himself is now a retired professor. He wrote a wonderful book about Timbuktu, which I really recommend reading. But coming back to the slave trade, the European slave trade, I also think it's really important to change how we talk about something. You know, we've talked a lot about language in this seminar, in this program. And the one thing to talk about language is also how we describe other people. There's a reason in Arabic when you start studying Islam, the first thing you start with is what? Ism, fi'il, harf. So you know what nouns are, you know what verbs are, you know what particles are. When you know those things, that allows you to be able to construct greater forms of speech. So hence, when we talk about particularly our brothers and sisters of African heritage who were enslaved, don't refer to them as slaves because it removes the question from your head about who enslaved them. But when you call them enslaved African brothers and sisters, the question comes up, who enslaved them? Why did they enslave them? How did they enslave them? And it allows us to build a liberation theology, one rooted in the Sharia that allows us to talk about justice, adal, qistas, all of that. Qistas also in how we understand our history. So you begin to see how many people from West Africa started moving into Brazil and also into the Americas. But there's another article that I want to tell you all about. This article, which the title is covered, but you can Google this guy's name, Jeffrey Harverson. He talks about how roughly 15 to 30% of enslaved peoples that arrived in South Africa, or rather South Carolina and Georgia, were Muslims. 15 to 30, some estimates push that to 30 to 60%. I lived in Atlanta for some years, and you can trace this history. But so much so that you have individuals like this, Umar ibn Sa'id, who was an alim. He died in North Carolina, captured in 1807, who used to write Quran in the fields. So much so we have manuscripts today. And if you read this manuscript, this was written by his hand. It says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulku wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. This is his handwriting. Somewhere in North Carolina in the 1800s, he was writing Quran from memory. These are the histories that we don't know about. These are the histories that we have compromised away from. And how does that challenge? How, for example, in schools, they talk about these narratives, these grand narratives about what? Oh, the average African did not know anything, they were uneducated. No. This man was an alim of the deen. This man had memorized fiqh texts. This man was a hafiz of the Quran. He was a scholar. But these identities are erased because they don't serve certain people. They don't serve certain narratives. And I have a whole course about how many Muslim enslaved kings and queens, literally royalty, ulama, were taken and sold into slavery. We have 10 minutes, inshallah. So I'm going to finish off. I'm going to save the best for last. The good old British Empire. And actually, there's something that I just wanted to change here very quickly. Animate this. Up here on click. Okay. So the British Empire, like I said, saved the best for last because of the fact you see how much of the Muslim world they literally controlled. So basically most of the African continent, in essence much and most of the Arab world. South Asia itself was a direct dominion of the British Empire. And then obviously the eastern United States, which eventually became the entirety of the United States. But it's interesting. There is this individual named Shashi Tharoor. He's an Indian politician. He wrote this book called An Era of Darkness. He says something very interesting. This quote, he's talking about Winston Churchill. Everyone in the West sees Winston Churchill as like this awesome guy, but he just to ration out the food and describe them as rodents. And when I say Bengali, do not think Bangladesh. Bengali means Bihari. Bengali means Bengal. Bengali also means from Odisha. Bengali also includes what is modern day Bangladesh. It was a giant region. So you have to keep that in mind. He also says something very interesting. You know, the British, they have this idea in which they say, God does not allow the sun to set on the British Empire. You ever heard that term? Shashi Tharoor says, yes, God does not allow the sun to set on the British Empire because God does not trust them in the dark. So that's why. But to give you an idea of how the British saw the world, this is a picture of Cecil Rhodes. For those of you that know, has anyone here heard of the Rhodes Scholarship? Raise your hand. It's a very prestigious scholarship. It's named after this guy who quite literally viewed black people as vermin. He viewed Indians as less than the white people. But this is a picture of him standing like this because he wanted to create a railroad called from Cape to Cairo. But what a wonderful picture of a white colonial administrator standing on the continent of Africa like this. These are not the things that people talk about. You know, he had his own country called Rhodesia. Does anyone know what Rhodesia is today? Yes. Zimbabwe. Very good. So I'm going to end off with this story, inshallah. We have 8 minutes. These pictures here of two people, Sharif Hussein on the left and Fakhruddin Pasha on the right. Many of us, because of the way that we have been kind of, you know, how we view people stereotypically, would have you thinking the guy on the left is the good guy and the guy on the right is the bad guy. The guy on the left, his name is Sharif Hussein. He was appointed by the Ottoman Empire to be the governor of Mecca. And the guy on the right is an Ottoman soldier named Fakhruddin Pasha who fought all over the world for the Ottoman Empire, but he became known as the defender of Medina. Aslan Medina, the Mudafa Medina, the defender of Medina. Why is that? Well, the guy on the left, Sharif Hussein, is approached by a certain individual to basically do this. This is the Ottoman Empire being controlled by the Ottomans. Sharif Hussein is promised a caliphate. And an individual whose name I'll tell you in a moment gets in touch with Sharif Hussein and says, Sharif, you're Arab. You are from the lineage of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You are a Sayyid. How dare you let these Turks rule over you? You're Arab. You deserve to rule. You deserve to have your own caliphate. And Sharif Hussein says, yeah, good idea. So this friend of Sharif Hussein, he's like, look, if you can help us create Arab revolts on the basis of Arab nationalism to push back against Ottoman rule, we'll give you all of this. We'll give you the Arab caliphate and it'll all be yours, this whole area. Unfortunately, Sharif Hussein did not get that caliphate. Instead, he was given this small little region for a little bit of time and eventually he made his way up here. Who was the person that made this promise to Sharif Hussein? Well, it was this guy. His name was Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia, also known as T.E. Lawrence. This man quite literally put the idea in his head to do what? To take over the Arabian Peninsula. Eventually, Fakhruddin Pasha is sent. And Fakhruddin Pasha is an Ottoman commander, and he sends a letter to Sharif Hussein. And he sends a letter, and it reads, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, from the defender of Medina to Sharif Hussein, the one who jeopardized the caliphate of the commander of the faithful and exposed it to the dominion of the British. Sharif Hussein is the first individual in the entirety of the history of Islam to have let Mecca and Medina fall under non-Muslim rule. He is directly responsible for that. And Fakhruddin Pasha sends him this letter. I'm not going to read the entire text. But the letter, he says that, I fell asleep and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to me in my dream. And he said, oh Fakhruddin, whether you die or whether you live, whether Medina is taken or not, you do not stop fighting the British. You do not stop fighting Sharif Hussein. You continue to do it, whether you die in that path or not. And Sharif Hussein ends the letter, I am now under the protection of the Prophet, my supreme commander. I am busying myself strengthening the defenses, building roads and squares in Medina. Trouble me not with useless offers. Basically, what ended up happening? Why is it that Sharif Hussein only got this? Because when Sharif Hussein was negotiating with the British were also negotiating with the French. And an agreement known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement came about, in which they said that instead of giving Sharif Hussein this caliphate, let's do one of two things. Number one, let's carve out a new country in this area, which is currently known as Palestine. And number two, let's divide all of this territory between us, between the British and the French, all of this territory. So what ends up happening? Well, when T.E. Lawrence brokered this deal, Sharif Hussein decided that he's not going to help. Eventually, Fakhruddin Pasha is arrested, sent to Malta. Malta was where? What was in Malta? Kalapani. Kalapani. You ever heard of that place where the British sent their dissidents? But eventually, this led to the Balfour Declaration, in which the British are talking amongst themselves about this new Jewish homeland. Sharif Hussein hears about this, and he's like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And he says that I'm not going to honor the deal. Even though he was basically a traitor to the Ummah, he says enough that if you're going to take Palestine, I'm not honoring this deal. A small family in Eastern Arabia calls up the British and said, hey, we heard you're having trouble with Sharif Hussein, can we help? And the British basically said, yeah, you know what, if you guys want to take over, feel free to do it. This family is known as the Al Saud family, and currently the area of Arabia is now named after them. It's called Saudi Arabia. They chased Sharif Hussein out into a region known as Transjordan. And in Transjordan, Sharif Hussein settled there. He has a son named Abdullah. Abdullah has a son named Talal. Talal has a son named Hussein. Hussein has a son named Abdullah. Brothers and sisters, welcome to the current king of Jordan, who is the great-grandson of Sharif Hussein. This is who we have. Now, what does it have to do with the next slide, which I'm going to end off with? All right, there's a lot more here, but I'm just going to go to the main slide here, which is this is of Palestine. I took this picture at Al-Hashimi Hotel in Palestine in 2022. My presentation today, brothers and sisters, is to show you how the entire Ummah is connected, and it is very important to go beyond these language barriers that we have and understand how we're all connected to the kalima la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So beginning with the taking of Constantinople, and then continuing on into how these empires, these European empires, wanted to get back for the sake of Christendom at the Muslim world. Going into the fall of Muslim Spain, which they greatly celebrated, and the beginning of the Spanish Empire, and using the loot of Muslim Spain to begin exploring these lands that we currently live in, connecting that with how the start of the slave trade led to our own brothers and sisters being thrown into captivity and being brought into the Americas, and then with what happened with the British Empire and the taking of Palestine, it's all connected. There's a lot more that I can talk about. This presentation is, like I said, well, if you really want me to do this presentation, I need the full hour and a half. I can never get the hour and a half no matter where I go. But when we are looking at our situation today, if you do not know your history, you cannot tell your narrative. If you cannot tell your narrative, do not complain in 100 years or 200 years about when people don't know who they are, where they came from, or if Muslims do not improve their situation beyond just knowing who the Messenger ﷺ was and when your ancestors came to this country. So it's important us to be holistic learners. It's important for us to really be engaged in these conversations. No, that's an old slide. But I have pictures of books and whatnot, but if you would like to, inshallah, stay in touch with me, you can sign up at our email list on Maktab Academy. And inshallah, I'll be here after the salah. So if anybody has Q&A, we'll keep it open. And whoever wants to ask questions or talk, we will inshallah be here. So we'll continue the Q&A after the salah. Jazakum Allahu khairan.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Please straighten your lines, close your hips. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تكونوا كالذين آذوا موسى فبرأه الله مما قالوا وكان عند الله وجيها. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. إنا عرضنا الأمانة على السماوات والأرض والجبال فأبين أن يحملنها وأشفقن منها وحملها الإنسان إنه كان ظلوما جهولا. ليعذب الله المنافقين والمنافقات والمشركين والمشركات ويتوب الله على المؤمنين والمؤمنات وكان الله غفورا رحيما. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ويل لكل همزة لمزة الذي جمع مالا وعدده يحسب أن ماله أخلده كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدراك ما الحطمة نار الله الموقدة التي تطلع على الأفئدة إنها عليهم مؤصدة في عمد ممددة. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Do you want to continue? We can get to the presentation or you want to keep it? I'm saying, can you skip speech? No, it's okay.
Inshallah, after the sunnah, we'll go ahead and continue with the Q&A. Jazakallah khairan. And maybe I'll include one more story, depending on how everyone's feeling. As people are finishing up their prayers, we'll get started in just a moment. It's available online in multiple places. Yeah, yeah.
Do you have yours?
If you go to the Maktab Academy website, it's there under scattered remnants, I believe. Yeah, just you can scan the code. It's not here. Yeah.
Are you going to cover Palestine came into the map and everything? Or
No, not
they
right
come
now.
to Jordan, I see.
Yeah, yeah. We talked about Palestine towards the end, but I didn't get into it. Yeah, but like we spoke about the Sykes-Picot and then we spoke about Balfour Declaration.
But not right now, you're coming to that point.
Yeah, we kind of touched on it, but I'll touch on it more, inshallah. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Is Shafi still here? Oh, it's one of my friends. He's Hyderabadi, and I told him I'd have a piece about Hyderabad. Okay, so this is the last portion. I actually haven't done this part of the presentation in a while, but this is about a Ottoman and Nizam pact, actually. So this is Turkish-Indian, but it was Ottoman and Nizam pact that never came into fruition. And then inshallah we'll get into the Q&A. For those of you that know about South Asian history, I mentioned, or before South Asian history, I mentioned the names of 3 empires. I mentioned the Mughals, I mentioned the Ottomans, and I mentioned the Safavids. There was one more empire in South Asia that was actually a force to be reckoned with in the 1800s and 1900s. And that was the Nizams. And the Nizams, they had a very international basically hold throughout the world. They had people in Hyderabad of different backgrounds. If you go to an area in modern day Hyderabad that's known as Barkis, it actually takes its name from the barracks because the Nizams had contracted Yemeni soldiers to fight in their armies. And not only that, Hyderabad, what a lot of people don't know, was its own independent kingdom. It wasn't a part of India. The nation state of India in 1947 basically invaded 2 regions, or 3, or a bunch of regions actually, to make a part of India. One of the regions that is still fighting to maintain its independence is called Kashmir. That's one of the regions that is still fighting today to maintain its independence. One of those other regions whose army was taken by the British were the Nizams. So when India was formed in 1947, they kind of just ran into into what is modern day Hyderabad and overtook it, and the Nizams were made to basically leave. And the other territory was Goa. So in the 50s, they kind of just rolled up onto Goa and took it away from the Portuguese. This is a very interesting conversation because by the end of the 1900s, by 1924, we mentioned that the Ottoman Empire was abolished. And at this time, if this is a picture actually, in Aurangabad, the city of Aurangabad was under the control of the Nizams. It's a empty Turkish tomb in which no one is buried in it. Why is that? Well, basically, this is an article by an individual by the name of Imran Mullah, and he recently came out with a book talking about this abandoned tomb in a remote part of India. Now, to give you an idea of how famous and how powerful and how wealthy the Nizams were, this is an issue of Time magazine, I believe in 1905 or 1910, talking about the richest man alive, which is the Exalted Highness, the Nizam of Hyderabad, who was valued in the millions. So today we talk about the richest people in the world. We talk about Elon Musk, and we talk about Jeff Bezos, and we talk about all these other people. But this man right here, the Nizam of Hyderabad, was the richest man in the world at that time. Now, what ended up happening? This man over here, this is Sultan Abdul Majid, who was one of the last Ottoman sultans to have ruled over the empire. He was someone that realized that his rule was coming to an end with Turkish independence and everything, and with World War I. So what did he do? He had 2 daughters, and he married his daughters with the sons of the Nizam. So he wanted to create a pact between Hyderabad, between the Nizams and the Ottoman Empire. And he made a secret pact. This pact basically understood that the Ottoman Empire was about to be abolished. And he was planning in the back, without the knowledge of the British, to re-establish the Ottoman Empire where? In Hyderabad. But this never actually happened. And it would have been amazing because if you think about it, the Ottomans and the Nizams at this time, they were working together and they had intermarried. And basically, these two, their children got married. But Sultan Abdul Majid didn't really like this guy's sons, even though he married his daughters into their family. He says that they used to drink, they used to party, the typical, you know what they say about wealth, right? They say wealth doesn't last more than 3 generations, because you have the generation that makes it, then the generation that sees the generation making it, and then the 3rd generation who neither saw the wealth being made nor its value. So by the time the 4th generation comes around, all the wealth is squandered. You guys have heard about this? So particularly, he did not like the fact that his own son-in-laws were not that dedicated to maintaining this caliphate. So, in essence, and to give you an idea, by the way, this is where Hyderabad is today, and much of the Mughal Empire used to be up here, right? And it used to connect down to here as well. But this is a letter that was actually discovered in the year 2022. And in the year 2022, the letter that was discovered was written by Sultan Abdul Majid, and in it, he declared that after his death, not his son-in-laws, but his son-in-law's children, particularly the first son, would be considered the inheritor of the Ottoman Caliphate. And this letter was not found ever. Because Sultan Abdul Majid, think about this. If he's building a mausoleum here, what does that mean? He wants to go to India and die there. That's what he's saying. He wants to go to India and die there. And the Nizams, they were kind of planning this. What ended up happening in this time period, in the 1930s, in the 1920s, in the 1940s, there was a lot of sentiment arising, leading to riots between Hindus and Muslims. So the Nizam said that I can no longer guarantee the Sultan's safety. They didn't have a military anymore. And then the state was ransacked by the creation of India, eventually. But before that time period, this dream could not be actualized. So eventually the Sultan, he actually went and died in Switzerland. It ended up not happening. He had a son by the name of Mukarram Jah. Mukarram Jah was half Turkish because of his mother, and was half Hyderabadi from the lineage of the Nizam because of his father. This was the grandfather. Now, eventually, the state of India comes to be. The Ottoman Empire is abolished. The family moves to London. And all the Jahs, they kind of took in a lot of money. They were worth billions with the creation of with the creation of India and Pakistan, much of their money was basically stranded in bank accounts in Pakistan. So they went from being billionaires to only having about $100 million left to their name, right? God forbid, $100 million. But basically, billions brings power and influence. Millions allows you to maybe rebuild, maybe not. Lo and behold, this never happened. Instead, Mukarram Jah, he lived his life out in silence, in solitary, basically in Istanbul, and he died there in, I think, 2022. In 2023, this letter is discovered, and it's an Arabic letter from Sultan Abdul Majid declaring something very specific here. An akhtar sahib ad-dawla wal-uzma Mir Uthman Ali Khan Sultan Hyderabad ad-Dakkan khalladallahu mamlakatahu wa saltanatahu li mansab al-khilafa. So it's basically saying that I am declaring Mir Uthman Ali Khan. In essence, like all these people, Muharram, Mufakham, they all had titles, but in it he's declaring that he is passing on his caliphate through his daughters to the Nizams. Eventually, this letter was only found 2 years after he basically passed away, or 1 year after he passed away. So this never came about. Coming back to talking about Palestine, all of these events that happened, you see how it's connected, you see how these changes came about, and you see how our brothers and sisters throughout the world are suffering. You see how the breaking of Muslim unity, what that has led to throughout the world, how it has not been beneficial to the Muslims of all these different places. Now we have all these national identities. Everyone is working for their national identity. But here we are broken, and we can't even get a bottle of water into Gaza. And I don't really have a straightforward action plan. Mine is telling everyone to not be reactionary, but start building strength and power, start learning, start understanding. And that's why I put together like a small list over here. This is actually a walking tour of Muslim Harlem I did last week. But I have a small reading list that I put together that I always tell people that if you're not going to read something, then you're never going to learn anything. Reading meaning what? If you need to listen to an audiobook, go listen to an audiobook. I recommend everyone start with this title. It's called Lost Islamic History. It's a very good book. And then I would say in the current day and age that we're currently living in, check out The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. He was a former professor of Columbia University. And then I have another course that I teach. It's basically about the history of Islam in America, which I think I taught it once in Sacramento, and that was kind of it. So this is the presentation that I have had made. And I think, like I said, this is the 13th or 14th or 15th time I'm presenting it in different forms. And now I hope to take some Q&A from you all. And also, if you want to get in touch with me, that's my email, and that's my social media handle. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, formerly, or X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, all those places. But if anybody has any Q&A, any questions, and if somebody can give the sisters a microphone, usually when I've done this presentation, sisters are present, we can have question and answer. But if somebody has some Q&A that they can ask, please do. And I'm specifically requesting that it's a question. If it's a comment, you can tell it to me in person after, but for the sake of time, please let it be a question, inshallah, you have about the presentation. Please don't ask me about like halal meat. Right? Ask me about what we spoke about today, inshallah. Yes? Yeah.
Don't you think that has correlation to today's what's going on, where every Muslim leader in the Arab world has essentially abandoned development?
Assalamu alaikum. This guy, right? So the question that the brother asks is that, the incident with Umar Futi Tal, particularly with declaring jihad against those that were selling their African brothers and sisters into slavery, that is there not a correlation today? Of course there is. But we had a lot more decentralized power structures. Now, it's been completely decentralized and destructured. So whether or not Muslims want to do something, it's almost like you can't. And I think it's important also to examine how we approach questions, right? So this is really interesting. Somebody asked my teacher this. He said that, is it haram? Now, again, look at the framing of the question. How many of you were here for today's khutbah? Raise your hand. Okay. In the khutbah, I mentioned that there's two problems. Number one is everyone approaches the Quran in a purely legalistic sense. Now, am I saying there's no halal haram in the Quran? Am I saying that? No. Is it haram to eat pork? Yes, it is. Is it haram to believe in another God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yes, it is. Okay. That's not the conversation I'm talking about. That is a part of what is present in the Quran. One of the problems I mentioned is that people are overly legalistic. So, somebody asked my teacher that, is it allowed for Muslims, or what is the hukum of Muslims joining the US military? Okay? And this is what he's saying. What is the hukum of Muslims joining the US military? And I'm going to say some things here that may be uncomfortable for some people, but it's a great way for us to get thinking. My teacher said that at most I can say it's makruh, but I'm not going to call it haram. And everyone in the room is like, how could you say that? Aren't people in the military going into Iraq, Afghanistan? They're invading these countries and they're fighting these unjust wars. And my teacher looks at him and says, wait a minute, so you're an American citizen, right? He goes, yeah. So your citizenship is what? It's a contract. It's a aqd, it's a ahd, right? So you're okay with paying taxes to this country that's doing this. You're obviously okay with making sure that your laws are protected. But at the same time, if somebody is going and doing that, it can be morally wrong. It can be a wrong decision. But boiling everything down to halal and haram doesn't solve this problem. If you want to talk about halal or haram, right, the fact is, for example, is it permissible? Like people want, I'm not going to get into the craziness of this, but getting a credit card. It's very difficult today to live without a credit score if you want to rent someplace. If you have 5 children, there are places that will not rent to you unless you have cash, right? Now, in your contract, it says that you'll have to pay like whatever, 20% APR interest if you don't pay on time, right? Is it impermissible to pay that? Sure. Do you have to pay that? Yes, you're bound by the contract. So on one end, there's an obligation that you have to do it. On the other end, you will still be sinful for it. So by me and you choosing to live here, we live in some form of a conundrum. We do, we all know this. Every time April 15th comes around, we're paying our taxes and we're like, this money is not billions being sent to Israel to kill our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So the question of, is it halal or haram to join the US military is predicated on, are you okay with having American citizenship and living with the burden of that? And somebody's like, okay, that's it. Brother Nihal said, American citizenship, haram, time to leave. Where are you going to go, buddy? Where are you going to go? Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to migrate to Turkey. I lived in Turkey for 3 years. Did you know it's just today, after 2 years of a genocide, Turkey declared that, okay, we're finally going to stop doing business with Israel. Right? Just today. And I'm not saying that, Turkey has done good work, but let's be real. In comparison to the rest of the other Khaliji countries and everyone else in the Middle East, Turkey was doing a little bit more. But even then, they were still doing business with the Israeli government until today. Oil still going until today. So I don't have a solution for that, but it's important for us to understand that whatever solutions we'll come up with, we may not be the recipients of those solutions, but when we start using our mind and we start learning what happened in the past, we'll probably be able to come up with a solution that is more rooted in reality for our children perhaps. And the sad reality is that we may not see a free Palestine in our lives. Inshallah we do. Inshallah we do. But the realistic aspect of the way we see the world going, we may not see one in our life, but what we do now will allow our children to hopefully see one. Hence, you want to talk about how to really understand tradition. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if you see the day of judgment happening in front of you, إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, you see the sun exploding, the volcanoes erupting, the earth cracking, everything, the stars losing their sight because of supernovas, the sun exploding, everything rolling up, and you have a seed in your hand. What did the Messenger of Allah say to do? To throw it away and go seek shelter? Run, duck, and hide or whatever? No, he said, plant the seed. Because you do what you have to do, meaning what? You should follow a process and be dedicated to a process and not always be dedicated to a solution, because sometimes that solution will not come in your lifetime. Hence, you do what you have to do, and Allah will do what Allah has to do. And I think that's the thing. We always try to control things, particularly if I led a Hajj group last year, right? And I led a Hajj of, mashallah, like 200 or something American Muslims. Man, American Muslims at Hajj. You know, there's some communities you feel like you're the Prophet ﷺ and you have the Sahaba around you. I felt like I was Musa alayhi salam in Bani Israel. Because all I heard was, I paid for the luxury package, brother. Why is there no luxury tent in Mina? Where's the luxury Arafah? Right? And why am I saying this? It's because of the fact that everyone is so focused on just getting it done, right? It's just getting it done. You know, there's something Allama Iqbal says. He says, "Reh gayi rasme azan ruhe bilali na rahi, reh gayi falsafat alqeen ghazali na rahi." Meaning what? That people give the adhan without the spirit of Bilal, and they study philosophy without the understanding of Ghazali. Meaning what? That people just have this very robotic understanding of the deen, and they're not willing to be committed to some form of methodology building, which will be generational. All of what we studied, is this not a culmination of where these Muslims got to from the work and the efforts of their ancestors? And that's how we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking not just, you know, short-term solutions for everything, but thinking about long-term projects that will have generational impact. That's a really long answer to your short question. Inshallah. Yes? Let's stay to the subject, please, if that's okay, because if we need to, we'll go away from it. But let's stick to what we were speaking about, inshallah. Okay? Let's come back to that. Right now, I want to focus on what we're just talking about, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Let's come back to that. Yes?
So I have a question that, like, I am from Bangladesh. So as Bangladeshis, we don't know that.
আমি বাংলা বলতে কিন্তু আমি বাংলা বলতে পারি না।
Okay. So we don't know that there was a strong Muslim sultanate in Arakan. Like, though, like people doesn't know that much. Like also Arabs doesn't know the one who shot the most highest number of Israeli jets was a Pakistani Air Force pilot who was also a Bangladeshi by birth. So as non-Arabs, don't you think it's a problem that when we try to know our history, we concentrate more on the Arab history, which is well documented, but we forget our own that should have connected us more to the Arabs and non-Arabs.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So your question. So what's your question?
the question is like,
Yeah.
like as non-Arabs, like don't you think like we should concentrate on our history more rather than when we start to know, we just concentrate on the Arab side of the history, which is well documented. But our history, we don't study that at all.
Yeah, you know what I call that? I have a term for that. It's called DIC, Desi Inferiority Complex, right? Where, brother, I have to pronounce my ayn, and I have to pronounce my dad, and I will not wear shalwar kameez, right? That's a very common thing. But when you realize that the South Asian Islamic tradition is actually a mix of Turkish and Arab and Persian and leftovers even from all these different areas, it changes your perspective on things. But even talking about Bangladesh, and forget Bangladesh for a second, about Bengal, right? I always tell people when we talk about India, we should really talk about Bengal more so than just Bangladesh, because all of those were later creations. So like I talked about Winston Churchill, right? And Winston Churchill starving 3 million Bengalis. It was Bengalis in Bengal, right? Where did it go? I had this picture of India. Ah, here it is, right? This entire region, all of this, is actually what was considered Bengal, that Winston Churchill starved out. And not only that, under the British Empire, Bengal was where the capital of British India existed, which is Kolkata or Calcutta. Right? My father grew up in that city. That's why I know a little bit of Bangla. But that's the thing. It's not just, it's actually, I'll push back against that. It's important to know everyone else's history, sure. It starts with knowing your own history and then kind of building off of that or branching off of that, right? So I think what it comes down to is having, so like this book I recommended, the Lost Islamic History one, this one up here, This will give you in like 200 pages a summation of everything you guys basically need to know about the Muslim world and the different empires. There's another book that just came out. I don't know if somebody can remind. It's actually funny. I just bought it. I forgot the title. It's by a gentleman named Tamim Ansari. It's like Destiny Expounded or something. I've been hearing a lot of people say wonderful things about it. It's a very nice book written by a journalist about Islamic history. But I think that learning process has to be wholly encompassing, I think. It should start at home for sure. But you know that inferiority complex that I mentioned? It sometimes starts because, here's the other thing. Brothers, you know, there's just so much bid'ah in South Asia, right? Let's just dismiss the entirety of South Asian Islam because like certain people do certain things that's not Islamic. Worst argument in the world, right? Or even better, no man, I'm an American Muslim. You know, I don't really want to learn about Pakistan or Bangladesh. I just want to speak English, you know. You hear both sides of it. The second thing I just did, that's called American exceptionalism. That comes from kibr. I'm born and raised in this country. I grew up in New Jersey, lived in New York City, lived all over the country. And I'll tell you this, Americans have an American exceptionalism problem. And then when Muslims come here, they have a Muslim American exceptionalism problem. And I saw that in Hajj. They were like, wait a minute, we're American. How come we didn't get the front of the Mina camp? Right? No, seriously. Seriously. Those are our problems. Is that not a problem of kibr? Is that not a problem of ego? And not only that, the guy that's complaining about that, he got his American passport 4 years ago. Right? Like that's the worst part about it. So I think that's where it comes from. It starts from the self, and it is almost like a tazkiyatun nafs thing where you start learning about where you come from beginning. You know, like, think about this. Why is nasab so important? Why is it important for a child to know where they came from? Why is it that we know that it's Muhammad, Rasulullah sallallahu ibn Abdullah, right? Ibn Abdul Muttalib, ibn, and we know it all the way to the silsila of Ibrahim and Ismail alayhi salam. Because there is a level of historic identity rooted in knowing where you come from. And if you were to expound upon that, it ties into your history as well. Yes?
I want to respond to that. I'm from Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So I read a lot of history. One of the things that I noticed is that, first of all, the South Asians have an inferiority complex. Number one.
Yeah.
They think that people from Middle East are better than.
Let me pass this mic around to you.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. So I actually grew up in the United States, and I've seen like the South Asians, and they have an inferiority complex. They think that Islam is better in other countries and other nations. That's why the Indian subcontinent people discount their history. However, I looked at the alumni of what is that very famous university, Islamic university in India?
There's a bunch, I'm sure.
No, the one that a lot of ministers came from. Aligarh University.
Okay.
And honestly, I was blown away by how many alumni from Aligarh were eminent nation creators, not masjids, not madrasas, nation creators from that one university.
Yeah.
And they came from Bengal, they came from everywhere. So the thing is, what I found is that Indian Muslims, they have a lot of history, but it's not translated into English.
Yeah. You know, to that point, I would push back on that. So there's actually a lot of history present in English, but it's not in English that is easily readable for an American audience, actually. That's the issue. So I took a course. How many of you are ethnically Indian? Raise your hands. Okay. Does anyone here know who the foreign minister of India is right now? Jaishankar Subramanian. His brother is my professor at UCLA, Sanjay Subramanian. So I took a class with Sanjay, and the amount of literature that's actually present about South Asia is actually insanely well documented, but it's written in 1970s British English in India. You know, there's actually another slide which I'll share with you all talking about English, now that we've kind of come to this conversation. It's a really, really good slide. I actually took it out last minute for the sake of time.
So when we talk about English, South Asian Muslims should be really happy about something.
The most famous English translations of the Quran came from South Asia. If it was not for South Asian Muslims, we would not have many English translations of the Quran. And actually, in 40 years, Muslims in South Asia produced more English translations of the Quran than we did in about 400 years. I'm sorry, in almost 1,000 years. So you have Muhammad Ali. So Muhammad Ali actually was Qadiani, but he still did an English translation of the Quran for the sake of propagating like Qadianism, Ahmadism, whatnot. Then you had Abdullah Yusuf Ali, who wrote his translation. He eventually died and is buried in Woking, England. You have Marmaduke Pickthall, who became a Muslim and actually wrote his translation under the Nizams of Hyderabad. And they paid for him to write his translation. And then you had Muhammad Asad, who eventually became Muslim. And he was actually jailed for 4 years by the British because of the fact that he was ethnically Polish, right? And keeping in mind the history, they were fighting against who? Germany and Poland. It was all one at that time. So these 4 people quite literally made English, the Quranic, made Quran in the English language as an accessible text. And I think South Asians should be so proud of themselves for that. So proud of themselves. If it wasn't for these gentlemen, the accessibility to Quranic translations in the entirety of the world would almost be 0 to none. Because you had the British maybe making some translations here and there, but it was for the sake of, what do you call it? Just understanding it, administrative stuff, but nothing like extensive. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Sure.
Regarding the Bangladesh or Bengali community or the Muslim,
Yeah.
we have, I think, a big distinction. We need to find the source of knowledge of Bangladeshi Muslim.
Yeah.
It's not from the Quran or from the Hadith. It's from the people and the people they hear about.
Right.
Right? So there's a big disconnect. What would happen in the past, like the source of knowledge of a Bangladeshi Muslim, and it came as more of a culture.
Sure.
Culture than a religion or the way we should understand Islam.
Sure.
Just holding Quran and Sunnah. That's one thing. That's why a lot of culture like Hindwani culture and all this are already blend in with Bangladeshi Muslim or
Sure.
Muslims.
Okay.
The other thing I would say about you mentioned about Imam. He talked about the pan-Islamism,
Right.
right? And that is the concept of having ummah without the national boundaries. So I believe, in my opinion, that we need to revive that, and that's where we need to head to without geographical boundaries.
Yeah.
Because in the past, the identity crisis that we are having these days, the American Muslim, Bangladeshi Muslim, Indian Muslim, Arab Muslims, and all this is based on geographical boundaries.
Right.
Okay? But as a Muslim, we unite under one boundaries, which is the ummah.
Mm-hmm.
And with that concept, we can come out or overcome the crisis
Sure.
of this identity. Even in the past,
Let's follow that up with a question. What's your question? Yeah.
the question is, the crisis that we're having, do you think that can be solvable with the concept of Muhammad Iqbal and the concept of ummah?
So, do I think that the issue of organization around nation-state identity can be solved through what Allama Iqbal basically said in the concept of ummah? I think theoretically, sure, right? But again, we're like thinking here, so it's a cool idea. Now, how do you now go about talking about that? I think the first thing that comes down to is understanding economics and politics. That's the first thing. Because here's one point, destabilizing nations isn't going to benefit anyone. We've seen that. We've seen how it doesn't work, right? So obviously, what does that lead us to? I think it comes down to coming up with economic and political solutions and eventually building up from there. And I don't, see, this is the thing that people were talking about, like in the United States. Anyone here Albanian?
I'm talking about the concept of Hajj and all this.
Right, I'm getting to your point, right? So you see Albanians or other communities, they, within their own communities, build their own economics. They'll have certain lobby groups. You see, for example, in the United States with AIPAC, what is it exactly? AIPAC, they're able to be united around some idea of what it means to be Jewish and Israeli and American. I don't think we have that because we're like still figuring out whether we're like Hanafi or Sufi or Salafi. So I think the first thing comes down to is becoming very educated and understanding how economics and politics can come together and be inspired by an ethos and an ethics that is most definitely Islamic. But I don't think people really engage with that. And the second thing is it's going to be a generational project, right? I think, yeah, it is, right? For example, Allama Iqbal, when he says these ideas about boundaryless Muslims living together, it's good, but you know, like he's saying this as something in the past that no longer is existing, and he's sad about it. But the problem that ends up happening when we go through presentations like this, we end up leaving it as like a good feeling or like a sad feeling, and I think it's important to move beyond feeling. But I think it is possible. I think most definitely it's possible. You have organizations like Ummatics that are trying to have these conversations where literally the language that we're using about talking about the Ummah needs to change. I think we're getting there, and we'll get there slowly yet surely. And I think there will be a gradual move towards that. Because nation states serve the elite of certain areas. That's all it is. They serve the elite of certain areas. Like, why is it that this guy gets his own nation state? Why is it this guy has his own nation state? Because this guy helped him get it. He was inherited into it. Look at the aristocracy. Why is it that 2 Bushes can be the president of the United States? Why is it that 2 Clintons can run for the president of the United States? Because it's coming down to proximity to money and power and being able to make decisions. Muslims at the end of the day, wherever they may be, have to work within a system, but it's only through money, power, economics, and political influence where we'll be able to get anywhere. I think that's the short answer to that. Yes?
So, I heard your presentation and everything, and I liked it. And you mentioned the mistakes that our ancestors made. So I want to know, my question is, so how would we, as the youth of this ummah and the future of it, how would we avoid these mistakes that our ancestors made to make a beautiful future and to be even better than them?
I think it's a very good question. So, what's your name, by the way? Muhammad. So he made a very good point. He's asking, how do we make sure we don't fall into the mistakes of our ancestors, right? And how do we as young people move up? Number one is studying. It's actually the most important thing, right? You know, okay, how real do you want me to get? Okay, I'll get real. When I lived in Dallas, I had a very tough time staying here. You know why? Because all the religious speeches I hear are just like make me feel good speeches. There's no real content that I was hearing. I don't know if you all feel the same way, but I didn't want to stay here for that reason. And it goes both ways because many communities, right, you're living the dream of the American Muslim in suburbia with your 4,000 square foot house, which you bought with your leftover chai money in 2002, and then after that, everyone built large masajid. But when it came to actually building thought, and building like real methodology, there wasn't that much effort put into it. The first and foremost, it sounds cool to say learn your deen. We'll talk about that in a moment. You need to learn the most 4 fundamental ideas of how societies run, how power is consolidated. Number 1 is ideology, right? What people believe. So you can, let's say, put Islam into that conversation about how ideology works. Number 2, you have economics. Right? So how do our economics work for our community? Number 3 are politics. And it's not just about becoming a typical Republican or Democratic shill, because we've seen that that's not working either. Right? We thought 20 years post 9/11, working with the Democrats is going to be good for us. October 7th happens, and suddenly they throw us all out to dry. And we just think, okay, Republican it is. Trump comes to power, and he doesn't do anything whatsoever. He makes things worse. And the 4th is, guess what? At the end of the day, it's military power. Military power is what makes a state. You know how everyone is now in these European countries like, we're going to recognize Palestine, Netanyahu. Be careful. You know what that recognition of Palestine involves? No military power whatsoever for Palestinians. So is it really a state? Is it really a recognition? No, it's not. It's a publicity stunt. That's what it is. My answer to the 4th thing, I have no idea how that would work. right? I don't have a military background, and I would never say that you should just go and like take over a state, because that doesn't work, right? Don't forget like what happened in Egypt in 2011, 2012, right? We've seen how things don't sometimes work in that way. But as Muslims, the most I can say is don't be reactionary. Understand how systems work in the modern world you live in. That's the most important point. Secondly, build your deen in your home with your friends and family. Not this stuff. You don't build deen just from here. You don't, this is that, right? I can be a terrible person and be up here, right? And then if you're tying your Islam to figures, Dallas knows the best about that, right? We know about generations of youth that have been ruined because some figure did something terrible. Like, close the door on that and start fixing your homes. Right? Start talking to your wife, start talking to your husband, start talking to your children, and start in internal learning of who you are as an individual. Not everyone is going to be the same. There's a saying in Arabic, "Man arafa nafsa arafa rabbah." Whosoever knows themselves, they'll know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They'll know their Lord. Hence, it could be that you're somebody that is very well accustomed to understanding certain subjects. Study those things. Study political science, study economics, understand those things. Actually, the American university system, this is like something really interesting. So I did terrible. I mean, the fact that I'm doing a PhD right now is like a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? I always tell this to people. I was horrible in undergrad. But when you go to other systems in other countries, you don't just study one subject. You have a track like politics, philosophy, and economics, which is like a track at Oxford or something like that. Because when you hear these names also, like Harvard, Princeton, all that, believe it or not, it's not that hard to get into those spaces and to learn. I'm not talking about becoming an elitist. I'm not talking about that. I know there is a social culture that comes with that, but what I'm saying, it's important to understand systems and to be present where these conversations are happening. And yeah, in that process, to also understand what your deen is and not have a transactional learning relationship with your deen. Learn your deen for the sake of learning your deen. Yes.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. Did I hear you mentioning that the Saudi have collaborated with both British and French to kick Sharif Hussein out of Mecca?
I don't know about the French, but the British definitely. Yeah, 100%. And I think a few people have asked me already. The person to read about, that writes a lot about the history of Saudi Arabia and what happened, his name is Bernard Haeckel. He's a professor at Princeton. He writes a lot about the history of Saudi Arabia, and he's very close to the royal family. Yes?
Brother, I know you've been traveling most places in America, and you've seen a lot of the youth. This masjid and the founders, Imam Yusuf, used to say, Islam will be spread from America, and the next generation will be able to come from America. That was the establishment of the school and everything. So from what you see traveling around the U.S., is the youth, the new generation, our children, are they in a position to spread Islam to the rest of the world, since America gave us a lot of resources? Our children, are they taking advantage of that? Are we in that path?
You know, Umar radiallahu anh, he had a very interesting saying. Many of you may be aware of this. And I know it's getting late, so I think I'll probably end off on this question. He said that I do not fear, or actually, sorry, the Messenger of Allah, he said this. He says that I don't fear the ummah going poor, right? He never said that. I don't fear the ummah. He never saw poverty as like something the ummah should fear. He said, I fear you becoming so wealthy that you become so lax and you don't want to do anything. It's tough to answer that question. It's tough to answer that question because of the fact that on one end you do see people are so engrossed in living the American dream. You get your nice house, you call it a day, you go to work, you don't question anything, you have an IT job, you don't rock the boat, you marry who your parents tell you to marry, you work whatever you're told to work, you get your M5 or your Tesla, and that's kind of it. But on the other hand, you see amazing institutional work being done, and Muslims throughout the world are, yes, looking at Muslims in America. They really are. Whether they should or shouldn't, I don't know. But I'm a big believer in localized efforts. You know, I spent, you know what, I spent a lot of time, believe it or not, in Tablighi Jamaat. I went to a Deobandi madrasa. And until this day, I believe my love of deen comes from my time with them. And they used to always say, you can think as global as you want, but if you're not acting locally, it's useless whatever you're doing. Act locally, and the most local you can get is act in your heart, expand it into your household, and then move forward from there, inshallah. So, inshallah, I'm going to end off on that. I'll be here. So if you want to ask me a question, but inshallah, we're going to end off on that. And as I mentioned over here, if you want to keep in touch with me, then just, you can, you know, the top up there, inshallah. But I'm here if anybody has any questions, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope this was an insightful discussion and presentation.